Welcome to Corpstruction, the podcast of the Tulsa District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm your host, Brannen, Parrish. Today I have with me Michael Ware of the Tulsa District Regulatory Office. Michael, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, Michael, you've been in regulatory since the 90s, I guess, about the mid-90s. And what is it that regulatory does?
Well, I tell you, I started in April of 95, been in the program a long time. The Regulatory Office is responsible for two federal laws. Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, which deals with anything that could affect navigation, basically anything, any activity adjacent, under, over a navigable waterway requires authorization from the Corps.
So what's a navigable waterway? How do you determine what that is?
Well, a navigable waterway was pretty much established by Congress, and it is a waterway that was historically used or currently being used to transfer goods and services down waterways.
So like barge operations, like the MCARNs is a navigable waterway.
That is correct.
But and I guess even to some degree before the MCARNs came into existence, there was some navigation activity on the the Red River, at
Yes.
least at some point in history,
Yes.
before Lake Texoma was constructed, or Denison Dam was constructed.
That's correct. And so a lot of people had basically homemade barges made out of logs. They basically put their goods and services on those logs. They took them from point A to point B downriver to move those goods and services. So that's how we come with the navigable waters term.
And so you guys regulate that, and how does regulatory regulate navigable waterways? Like what are some of the things that you guys do with regard to that?
Well, in the Port of Catoosa, using as an example, we any type of mooring facilities, or if it's a channel that needs to be deepened through excavation to establish the normal elevation that's needed for barges to go up and down a river, utility lines that go under, basically to ensure that if they go under, that they are placed deep enough under the river that future dredging will not impact those type of systems in the future. Also, we regulate those activities that go over the navigational waterway, and for the same purposes. And then anything that's adjacent to a navigable waterway, we want to make sure that it's put in such a way that it does not impact navigation traffic upstream or downstream of the waterway.
So can you give me an example? What do you mean by like adjacent? When you say like next to the shore, or?
Well, let's say like a new boat ramp. A new boat ramp comes in. We want to make sure that boat ramp isn't putting in so much traffic that it impedes navigation, because the primary concern for the Corps in this particular case is going to make sure that we have our barges that'll be able to go up and downstream. And not to get in the weeds here, but it's really just to ensure that whatever they're proposing will have a minimal effect on navigation.
We often hear, in talking to regulatory, you often hear about fill. So who is fill, and why do people want to put him in the river?
Well, fill is our second authority. The placement of dredged to fill material is regulated under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. So when people place dredged or fill material in the waters of the U.S., that they have to come to the Corps in order to get a permit. So you may say, wow, why is the Corps doing dredge and fill, right? Well,
Right.
Because of navigation. So Congress looked out and said, who's out there already has a good relationship with the public, who's working with it. The Corps was doing such an excellent job with the navigation program, so Congress gave it to the Corps to allow us to run this particular program. And that's why you have the Army Corps of Engineers in people's backyards, all the way up to grandma's house when it comes to regulating stream channels and placement of fill in wetlands.
Yeah, I guess over time the regulations came through, and that congressional authority was what was used to protect those waterways for navigation, and I guess even those tributaries, they impact navigation ultimately, right?
Right. And when you say tributaries impacting navigation, you remind me of a childhood story. Me and my cousins, we would race blades of grass, and we would race those in a town called Meridian, Oklahoma. And we would race those blades of grass down the ditch into the creek channel, all the way down to Bear Creek to who we couldn't see them anymore. And man, we just loved doing that, playing in the water. We loved to be outside. And as a kid, I would have never imagined that where I was playing in this ditch in Meridian, that it flowed down into Bear Creek down into the Deep Fork into the Canadian down to the Arkansas River down to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf. I would have never believed that when I was a kid. I just assumed water went somewhere. I just didn't know where. But it really wasn't until I became an adult where I realized that water that I was playing with actually helps out with navigation in Oklahoma.
It really is like a web, isn't it? Like that old saying about there's what you do is everything's a strand on a web, and what you do to one web sort of can impact the rest of the web.
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
Yeah. So one of the other things you all regulate and regulatory is wetlands.
Yes.
So how do you define a wetland?
So wetland has to have 3 criteria in order for it to be a jurisdictional wetland. So a wetland has to have hydrophytic plants, has to have a source of hydrology, and it has to have hydraulic soils. And basically, in absence of any one of those 3 factors, then it's not considered a wetland.
And what is a hydrophytic plant?
So a hydrophytic plant is a plant that's been adapted to being inundated by water. And I tell you,
like lilies.
Yeah, lilies. So they can, by definition, a wetland in most cases only have to have those conditions 5% of the growing season in order for those wetland characteristics to take place. As we know, 5% is not that much. And when we're talking about the growing season, so it doesn't take long for an area to be inundated before it starts displaying those wetland characteristics.
And if someone has an area in their backyard that stays wet like that, and they're concerned it might be a wetland, how do they get a determination made?
Well, they just contact us. And this is a good plug to say regulatory office number is 918-669-7400. Contact us. We'll assign a regulator to you, and we will get you a jurisdictional determination in a timely manner.
And what are the implications of a wetland being on your property? How do you have to deal with that?
Well, if it's indeed what we would consider a jurisdictional wetland, before a person can place fill in that wetland, they really need to talk to us first, and to ensure that one it is jurisdictional, and two, to determine if a core authorization is required.
So, what are some of the experiences that you've had to deal with waters of the United States? That's kind of the term that you use nowadays for that's kind of what navigable waterways has sort of morphed into, right? It's waters of the United States.
Yes. It's just a term that we use to it's an easier term, because when you think about navigable waterways, people think navigation. Well, there is no navigation in my backyard, so why is the Corps regulating navigation? But with the term waters of the United States, it's an easier term that people can look at and understand it. Yeah, that's a stream crossing. We might want to contact the Corps before we fill it in, relocate it. In some cases, put a pipe across it. They may want to. It's just an easier term for a person to identify what the Corps has jurisdiction over.
How do you differentiate between stormwater runoff, which is that's still a municipal thing, right? Stormwater
Yes.
runoff versus waters of the United States.
Well, stormwater runoff is regulated under a different Clean Water Act, and for the state of Oklahoma, that's managed through the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. And ODQ is responsible to ensure that runoff off of properties fall within their regulatory authorities. So we don't regulate runoff, but we do regulate the placement of fill
Okay,
or the placement of dressed or fill material.
right. What so what are some of the experiences that you've had dealing with waters of the United States?
Well, we have a vast number of nationwide permit authorities, and basically the nationwide permit is just a a a, a authorization that we generally use for minimal type activities, and that could be like your local bridges, bank stabilization. It could be utility line crossings, water line crossings, general and routine maintenance. There's a whole host of nationwide permits authorities that we have. So that's not a very easy question because it's too broad. But to make it more specific, if a person wanted to do bank stabilization in their backyard or along a river, if it's below a certain linear footage, then we could offer them a nationwide permit and expedite their authorization.
What are some of the other types of permits that you all? What is a nationwide permit? Why is something a nationwide
So,
permit?
so a nationwide permit is basically authorized by a headquarters office, and it's free to use nationwide. And those generally are authorized every 5 years. Um, then we have our general permits, which are basically uh, our regional type permits. They're central to the district. It may be an activity um, that we have decided that every time we do this individual permit, it results in the same um, findings of no significant impact. So we create a general permit to mimic what would be an individual permit level project that always has the ability to be a minimal impact, and we create a general permit for it. And so we have a general permit where in Oklahoma where DEQ has basically said we're not going to allow any road crossings in high quality waters. Well, we created a general permit to allow them to do that work and then get their site specific water quality certification from the ODEQ. So it's just a shorter, expedited uh, uh, permit permit that allows us to get to the authorization sooner. Then after that, we have our letter of permissions, which is again that is a expedited review period. We don't do a lot of those in Tulsa District, but then we also have our standard permits, which we try to do those within 120 days. However, because of certain issues, water quality certs, Section 106 of the Historical Preservation Act, and the endangered species concerns may push that over that 120-day level, or it could be just the applicant uh, doesn't does not respond to us in a timely manner. It's a whole lot of reasons why those go over 120 days, but those are just a few of them.
One of the important aspects of a permitting period is often the public comment period, and it's often overlooked. I think people maybe they get a request for stakeholder input, and I guess stakeholder is anybody who's technically impacted potentially, who has a stake in it, and that technically is the public in general. I mean, but often people may not respond to a public comment period. Why is it so important for people to, if they receive a letter, especially for maybe a project going near their neighborhood or through their neighborhood, why is it so important for them to take that into consideration and respond?
Right. Great question. And we're talking about standard or individual permit type activities, which is our one of our most lengthy permit activities. So when we have a project that requires individual permit level activities, we would do a public notice, and we will send this notice out for public comment to everybody that's within 300 feet of a particular project boundary. It is so important that the public reads that public notice and provide comments, because that comment period is their only window to have a voice on what happens on that particular project, or to address their concerns or issues. They may even say, we don't want this in our backyard. But it gives the applicant the opportunity to rebut their concerns and address their issues if needed. So if they don't respond, then they don't have there's no other mechanism for us to hear their concerns, because they only get that 30-day comment period. And that's good for the resource agencies, the SHPOs, and other state agencies that may want to comment on the project.
The SHPO, is that the State Historic Preservation Office?
That is correct.
Okay, so they deal with things that may be important to the history of a state or an area.
Right. In Oklahoma, the SHPO is broken into two offices: the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey, which they deal with items or artifacts, buried in the subsoils, historic items, clay, pottery, clay shards, arrowheads, things like that may be subsurface. And then we have the Oklahoma Historical Society that deals with structures that have been around for greater than 50 years. And that could be bridges, houses, barns, old wine cellars, old bank vaults. That could be a whole host of things that may make it on that national register.
Yeah, there are some interesting aspects to that comment period. Like, I've received phone calls from people in the past who've said, "Hey, I noticed when this project went through our area, I got a letter from the Corps, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought, oh well, it's just something." And then now I'm seeing water in my property, in my backyard or whatever, and I didn't notice that before. After the fact, there's not really a whole lot, I guess, we could do, right? They would have to exhaust some other avenue to.
Man, that's a great question. So again, when it comes to the public comment period, that is their window to comment. If they fail to comment, or if they choose not to, or they ignore the public notice comment period, they have to take other actions. Now, I'm not going to go deep in the woods here,
Right.
and give advice. But
Right.
there are other actions if a permittee's project has impacted their personal property. So they would have to look at those. The Corps would not be that door for
Right.
them to comment, for them to. The Corps would not be the comment agency to address their concerns.
When we were talking sort of back to the fill material issue, I guess if you're building a bridge across a river, like say the Arkansas River, right? Every concrete column that supports that bridge, that's fill, right? If
Yes.
it's in the riverbed, right?
That is correct.
Is there a distance from the river, like if it's maybe on the shore or 5 feet from? Is there like a distance where it's no longer technically fill, or where it becomes fill? Does it have to be within the bank? How does that work?
Well, that can work on smaller waterways like a creek channel. They can span a bridge. They can put a span bridge across it, and basically all of that material is on top of the bank, and they not need a permit from the Corps under Section 404. Section 10 is different, but in most cases, Section 10 is we're dealing with a really large waterway.
Right.
You're not going to be spanning that with a single bridge structure.
But you guys regulate. But you also regulate what goes over the waterways as well, right?
Under Section 10.
Oh, okay.
Not 404. We only regulates the placement of fill under 404. So let's go back to your example. So each one of those columns or piers, it would be considered a fill. But we also going to consider any temporary impacts, say a diversionary channel or a temporary work road that may go halfway across the river, so they can build one set of the piers, and then they'll pull that out and push it to the other side, and build the other set of piers as they go across the river. And so we're going to make sure that material that they place in there for temporary fill, they have to excavate it out. We're not going to allow them to just wait for the next flood of Keystone and wash all that sediment downstream. They got to pull that material out.
Right. Okay. And how do you impact, or how do you regulate our own dredging that we have to do after, say, a flood has dropped a lot of natural or silt in the water? But we still have to enable navigation to occur.
Right. So on our Section 10 waterways, we still have to follow our procedures. There is nothing in the regulations that says the Corps of Engineers itself is exempt from our program. So we will work hand in hand with our operations folks to ensure that any issues regarding navigation are addressed. Keep in mind that, depending on how the work is done, a Clean Water Act permit under Section 404 could be required, or a Section 10 permit under Rivers and Harbors Act 1899 will be required. So it could be and or both, depending on how the work is done.
Gotcha.
So it's always imperative that they come to us early in the process, and that way we can make sure that everything that we're doing can most likely meet their timelines. Because they're, again, you got to think about the Corps. They're trying to do things on time, within budget, and trying to do things safely. So when we're not here to try to be their stumbling block. We're trying to be we're trying to work our process through their timeline.
And for a permittee, why is it so important that they give you a product that's more specifications of what they're going to do than the sort of a marketing guide that looks pretty and is like 1,000 pages of fluff?
Right. We just need to get down to the nitty gritty. What do you want to place in that river waterway? So elaborate plans where they work very good and they cost the applicants a lot of money, we generally don't need those. But we do need a good set of working grade plans that are legible, that shows the intent of what they want to do, before we can look at any authorizations. But we don't necessarily have it. So if I'm dealing with a farmer, man, it just makes me think about a farmer story from back in the day. There's a farmer that wanted to do a project. I can't really remember what he wanted to do, but he's like, Mike, I got it in my head what I want to do. And he said, do you mind if I sketch it out on this napkin? I'm like, absolutely, sketch it out on a napkin. Well, and that napkin was his plans of what he wanted to do. So as long as he built his project the way he had vision in his plan and how we authorize it, there was no issue. And so, well, as I recall, that project went on without any hitch because we had a decent set of plans. He understood what he needed from us. We understood what we needed from him, and we were able to move forward with the project. Now, that's not going to work on a bridge crossing the Arkansas River.
Right.
We're going to probably need a professional set of plans that are stamped by a approved engineer. Now, let's just make sure not all plans need to be approved by a engineer. Okay? But some plans will need to be approved by an engineer.
And is that based on whether it's a 404 or a Section 10 or a certain size, or?
Well, it's probably going to be safe. It's probably going to be the size. It's going to be a safety factor. What's the potential of this structure or washing out? Could there be impact to someone downstream? We want to make sure that what they're putting in is going to be safe and it's going to be sound and it's going to stay in.
Now, if it's like a bridge, right, and it's something that the Oklahoma Department of Transportation is involved in, they're going to have to meet their engineering guidelines for bridges that cross waterways, I'm sure, in general. And then I'm sure we have some probably guidelines that they'd have to meet construction-wise or engineering-wise.
Well, ODOT they have a whole house of professional engineers, and that's what they do. They build bridges. So we're not going to really get in ODOT's way. However, we will look at their field quantities and make sure that what they're doing is adequate to ensure that whatever they're building in the river is going to be safe and sound.
Right. So
and a lot of it's going to be a professional judgment.
Right. It's got to be safe, but then at the same time, they have to balance that with how much bridge do they actually need.
Right.
Based on what traffic patterns and
right.
Then, like it's great that they may want to have a one big. It would be great that they might want to have one big giant concrete wall with a hole in the center.
Right.
But they've got to have those piers or something.
Right. And I think I look at it from this standpoint. If there is an existing 2-lane roadway and they want to expand it to 4, they shouldn't be giving us a bridge with 16 lanes across it. Right. So it needs to be commensurate to the type of activity that they're doing. Now, we do understand that sometimes they want to build a bridge a little larger to ensure future growth in the area. We allow for that with no issues, but it still needs to be a design that's pretty commensurate to the type of activity that they're wanting to build.
And when people see what are generally the most common complaints you get from people? What types of complaints do you most often really receive?
The most complaints that I would tell you that we receive are really going to be neighborly complaints. A neighbor gets mad because they feel like the neighbor has blocked the water from them, and they want us to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Depending on what activity they've done, we may not be able to help them because, I give you an example. I dealt with a person not too long ago whose major complaint was the farmer upstream, put a dam across, and now this person's not getting any water downstream. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a intermittent waterway, and Congress did not intend for us to regulate, some or all farm ponds, and so if this farm pond is constructed for the purposes of water and stock, it's exempt from our regulations, and so that applicant is technically going to have to wait for that pond to fill up, and then the water will resume. And so it's in contrast, if that person built it for recreational purposes, then they would need a permit from us, and we would that would constitute a violation of the Clean Water Act under Section 301, and then we would pursue that. But in most cases, that's a valid complaint. That person has a valid complaint that they're not getting any water downstream, right?
Right. Yeah.
But when that pond fills up, then that water will resume.
Is the size of the stock pond or whatever commensurate? Does it have to be commensurate with the number of cattle or livestock they have, or?
Yeah, great question. So if a person has 2 heads of cows and they want to put in a 50-acre pond, we're going to question that, right? Yeah, we're going to question that. They're like, no, you probably need, probably less than a half acre. So yes, it is commensurate to the size of the operation. And so if they want to file for that exemption, so if they have 2 heads of cows and they want to do a 100-acre pond, they're going to have to go through the permitting process.
What about diverting water from the stream? Where does that get into?
Well, in almost every case, it's going to be a violation. Okay, so and we get a lot of those cases where a farmer says, "Man, there's an oxbow there, and I want to farm that area, so I'm gonna create me a diversion dam and create a new channel, and I'm gonna make this water flow in different directions so I can convert this stream channel into uplands." We generally go 100% restoration, and they have to put the channel back to where it was in its original extent.
Now, oxbow lakes are almost always temporary lakes, right? Because essentially the water has changed direction at some point. You get this like trapped water area, right? That only gets refilled during, like, the sediment basically builds up around it, and eventually it evaporates and fills in, right?
Right, but that's still the jurisdictional waters of the U.S. And if a person wants to fill in an oxbow, they have to come to us for authorization.
Okay, so you best to let that do it naturally, right?
No, because it's always connected to the tributary system, so it's going to always at some point have some water in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether it's seepage or when the creek channel or river comes up, overspills into it, it's going to always have water in it. So I can't think of many oxbows that are dry over my career, but it is possible.
Filled in.
But those will still be jurisdictional.
Okay. Now, yeah, I remember I got a call from a guy one time who they said they wanted to go. They used this one area for gigging frogs, right? And the person didn't like the fact that they were taking this boat down their property. Now, when they're as long as they're on the boat, right? If they're in this waterway that runs through their property, as long as they stay on the boat, are they still good, or are they trespassing once they step, or are they trespassing going down this waterway?
Man, that's a great question. However, I would have to defer to your local game warden for that, because I don't know property rights.
Right.
I know that in some areas the property right may be the stream channel. But in other areas, the state of Oklahoma owns all of the water. So I'm not the best person to ask that question.
Yeah.
But I do believe as long as you stay on the boat, you're okay.
Right.
But you just can't go on someone else's property.
Right. So
without their permission.
The river can go down the stream, and you can be on a boat on the river. But now if someone comes and puts a bunch of gravel in there to stop anything from going through, is that acceptable, or they would have to get permission, right?
That's generally going to be a violation of the Clean Water Act, and they would need prior authorization from us, which most likely we're not going to allow.
Do you deal with a lot of stream bed stabilization or channel stabilization requests?
Yes.
And how can you explain that? What that means, stream bed or channel or bank stabilization?
Okay, so that's a great question. So bank stabilization is just basically nothing more than taking an eroding bank, placing riprap or gabion baskets or some type of in-stream mechanism like a J hook or something that will help move the water off of the bank to help stabilize it, to get the vegetation back. And so that's basically what bank stabilization is. It's just, but there's a whole host of things that you can do to provide bank stabilization, but it just depends on what proposal that they want to do, and it's really down to their affordability. Riprap is really expensive, and unfortunately, as I make a segue, the Corps of Engineers regulatory program and the Corps of Engineers as a whole, we don't pay for projects on individual private lands. Now we may cost share with a city or local government or a state agency, but for private individuals, we don't help them in that on those particular projects.
Right. And riprap is really it has to meet certain requirements, right?
It does.
Right.
Yes.
Like, I mean,
size, because you don't want riprap. You don't want the riprap so small that when the rain comes and the creek fills up, that it just washes it downstream like gravel. So it has to be a sizable size rock that's going to stay in place in order for us to authorize it.
And for anybody who's wondering what a gabion basket is, those have been used since, I mean, even in war, gabion baskets is basically a basket with rock, typically steel or metal type of material that you fill with rocks to basically create like a wall or
that is correct.
A blockade. Blockade.
Yeah, and they generally use galvanized steel, something that's
Yeah.
kind of lined. That way we don't get rusting or something that may degrade water quality off of those type of baskets. So, yeah, man, these are great questions.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever noticed a gabion basket. I was down at Sardis. They've got a bunch of gabion baskets down there, and it was neat to me the way that those are built. And they're not difficult to build, but I don't know what requirements you have to meet in terms of gabion baskets or whatever.
We're going to look at it the same way as riprap.
Yeah.
How many cubic yards of fill you're going to put in this waterway, and we're going to look at if they have alternatives. We're going to look at what they are doing in that waterway to ensure that whatever it is, it's going to be the most minimal impact to that jurisdictional water.
What if they dig a hole about a foot from the shore and put the gabion baskets in there?
Yeah, we're going to still look at that.
That still comes into
yeah. We're going to still look at it.
Because you're not putting fill in the water then, right?
Well, but you could be expanding the water.
Oh, you could be expanding the shoreline.
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
And so we want to look at that.
And then you've also got to worry about the potential for the dirt you've just dug up or whatever the material you've dug up going into the riverbed.
Right,
well, right?
That is correct.
So that's
that
fill.
Is correct. That's fill. It's a form of fill.
Right. So basically the answer is always check with the Corps before doing any bank stabilization of a water of the United States.
Yeah, I would say contact the Corps if you're going to plan on doing any work or any activity in any of the waterways, and including wetlands. And I tell you, I always say jurisdictional wetlands. Every wetland is not jurisdictional. However, but you can still come to us and we'll let you know if that wetland is jurisdictional.
Right. And that's one of those prevention is better than the cure.
Yeah, that is so true. That's so true. Yeah, the do the work and ask for permission does not work in our particular case.
Yeah, you're saying begging forgiveness does not work, right?
That is correct.
That could be very expensive, right?
Very expensive.
Right. Well, have we missed out on anything? Is there anything we need to touch on?
Again, we have a whole host of regulators in our office, and we're broken up into two units. And my area of concern was going to be all the way from Texarkana, Texas, all the way across the Central Plains of Oklahoma City into the northern Panhandle and Amarillo, Texas. Mm-hmm. My counterpart, Ed Perisoto, if you start down by Wichita Falls, Texas, and go over to Texoma Lake, And then far eastern Oklahoma, that's going to be our other unit. And so those are the two large areas, including our civil works projects in Kansas, that that our area in regulatory is broken down into. However, if you just dial 918-669-7400, any of our regulators can help you, at least get you to the right regulator or answer your general questions.
Right. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and sit down and talk to me. I know you have many regulators who you are supervising and making sure that they're doing the right thing. And if, say, someone wants to look at the public notices you guys are putting out, or they have questions about permit stuff and they want to know more, how can they find out about it?
Well, I would just say please dial 918-669-7400. Please dial 918-669-7400, and we will get someone assigned to you and address any questions or concerns that you have.
All right.
Man, this was fun.
Hey, I always enjoy it.
Man, I just had a question for you.
Yeah.
Have I answered all of your questions?
Well,
that you might have another question?
Don't you have some stuff up on the website that you guys put out there?
Yeah, everything. A lot of stuff that we do is on our website, including like what's going on in our program, and that website is long, however, but it is www.swt.usace.army.mil/regulatory. They'll get you anything you need to know about our program, what authorizations we have available, mitigation, what's the definition of placement of field, anything that you want to know about our program. Section 10 is out there on our website. But if you call 918-669-7400, any regulator can help you.
Outstanding. Hey, thanks again, Mike, for showing up and being here to answer people's questions about the regulatory program here in the Tulsa District. Thank you for joining us for Corpstruction. Corpstruction is a production of the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Public Affairs Office. This episode was brought to you by the Tulsa District Regulatory Office. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Including like what's going on in our program, and that website is long, however, but it is www.swt.usace.army.mil/regulatory. They'll get you anything you need to know about our program, what authorizations we have available, mitigation, what's the definition of placement of field, anything that you want to know about our program. Section 10 is out there on our website. But if you call 918-669-7400, any regulator can help you.
Outstanding. Hey, thanks again, Mike, for showing up and being here to answer people's questions about the regulatory program here in the Tulsa District. Thank you for joining us for Corpstruction. Corpstruction is a production of the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Public Affairs Office. This episode was brought to you by the Tulsa District Regulatory Office. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.